they whispered of screams. Not the ordinary cries of violence echoing through a restless city, but something far more unsettling. Mexico City, winter of 1892. From behind the iron balconies of a mansion on Tuba Street, a sound spread through the night like a disease. It wasn't the roar of revolution or the drunken shouts of men in alleyways. It was the sound of agony, raw, piercing, and relentless, so unnatural that even hardened policemen swore it lodged in their dreams like a parasite. Imagine walking past a home whose windows glowed with candlelight, the picture of wealth and Catholic virtue, while beneath those very floors, a symphony of human suffering was being conducted with meticulous precision. This is not myth. This is not folklore. This is the hidden truth of Guadalupe Bejarano, a woman whose name society has buried beneath layers of shame, silence, and denial. She was Mexico's first recorded serial killer, but more than that, she was a mirror of how power corrupts, how institutions cloak evil, and how the very structures that claim to protect the innocent can instead create the perfect hunting ground for predators. Tonight, you are not here for entertainment. You are here to awaken. And once you hear the full story, you will never look at the mask of respectability the same way again. Because every empire, every church, every government, every so-called civilized society creates shadows in which monsters thrive. And sometimes those monsters wear black veils, recite prayers, and present themselves as guardians of morality. Guadalupe did not simply kill, she engineered obedience, crushed identity, and turned human beings into specimens of her private laboratory. To understand her is to understand how the powerful manipulate the weak, how false facades become weapons, and how evil hides in plain sight until it is almost too late to resist. This story is not just about Mexico in the 19th century. It is about now, about the quiet wars of control that surround you, invisible yet suffocating. So lean in, listen carefully, because the knowledge you're about to receive was never meant for you. It is the kind of truth that alters a man once he hears it. And after this descent begins, there is no turning back. The year was 1887. Mexico City shimmered with contradictions, a place where opulence and starvation existed side by side like two faces of the same beast. Gas lamps lit the boulevards, their glow painting the carriages of noble families in silks and jewels. But just beyond the reach of that golden light, shadows crawled through crumbling tenements where barefoot children coughed themselves to sleep. President Porfirio Díaz preached of modernization, of progress, of Mexico rising to join the ranks of Europe's elite nations. Yet for the poor, modernization meant displacement, hunger, and desperation. And it was inside this divide, this fracture of society, that Guadalupe Bejarano rose. A widow draped in austere black, tall, stern, her hair pulled back so tightly it sharpened her already severe features. To the world, she was impeccable, devout Catholic, generous patron of church charities, an honorable woman who provided respectable domestic servants to Mexico's most prestigious households. Her mansion on Tuba Street was a fortress of wealth, its pink limestone facade and wrought iron balconies projecting power and respectability. She played her role with flawless precision, and society rewarded her with admiration. But what no one saw, or rather, what no one dared to imagine, was that behind the stone walls of that house, Guadalupe had constructed something else entirely. A hidden world where masks were dropped, and her true appetite was free to unfold. She called it her method, her way of training the young servants sent by desperate families from rural villages. These girls came carrying nothing but bundles of cloth and letters of recommendation from parish priests. They were poor, illiterate, nameless to the city, and that was the point. To Guadalupe, they were not daughters of grieving mothers. They were not individuals, they were resources. Tools, flesh and spirit to be broken down, reshaped, and used. This is where the facade becomes the trap. Understand this well, the greatest predators in history never show you teeth first. They hide behind institutions, behind piety, behind the polished etiquette of the upper classes. Guadalupe understood what kings, priests, and politicians have always known, that a reputation of virtue is the strongest camouflage for cruelty. She was not just a murderer. She was a strategist, a woman who looked at the invisible poor and saw a population no one would protect. And in that silence, she began to craft her empire of suffering. January 18, 1887. The morning rose gray and cold over Mexico City. A mist clung to the streets, softening edges, muffling sound, as if the city itself were holding its breath. And through that mist came a young girl, carrying everything she owned in a cloth bundle, her feet blistered from 6 days of travel. Her name was Casimira Jo Rez, just 16 years old, a child of the mountains whose parents had died in a cholera outbreak the year before. She had no family, no prospects, and no future except the one promised to her by a letter of recommendation from her parish priest. That letter bore a name spoken with reverence in her village, Guadalupe Bejarano, the widow who gave poor girls respectable work in the great city. Casimira knocked on the heavy wooden door of the Tuba Street mansion. When Guadalupe opened it, her eyes scanned the girl with a precision that was almost surgical. She was perfect, vulnerable, naven, and most importantly, alone. Casimira's braided hair, patched dress, and wide, desperate eyes marked her as prey long before she realized she had walked into the wolf's den. Guadalupe's smile was thin, her voice honeyed with authority as she ushered the girl inside. Good references are essential in my household. I keep high standards. At first, life inside the mansion seemed like salvation. A warm bed, regular meals, work that, though hard, was dignified compared to the hunger she had endured. She scrubbed marble floors, prepared meals, mended linens, always under the watchful gaze of her employer. But what Casimira mistook for discipline was in fact surveillance. Guadalupe observed her with the intensity of a scientist studying a specimen. Every reaction was catalogued. How long before she broke into tears, how much pain she could endure before her voice cracked, what expressions of fear flickered across her face. The testing began subtly, invisible dust on polished surfaces. Imaginary wrinkles in the laundry, a misplaced glance interpreted as defiance. Casimira apologized, worked harder, but it was never enough. Perhaps your priest overstated your abilities. Guadalupe murmured coldly one evening, perhaps you need more correction. And that word, correction, was the door that swung open into hell. At first, the punishments were small, standing motionless for hours, denied meals for clumsiness, forced to scrub stone floors until her hands bled, then scolded for staining them with her blood. Casimira thought she was failing, but she wasn't failing. She was being dismantled. Guadalupe had chosen her first true experiment, and this fragile girl would become the blueprint for Mexico's first descent into serial murder. By February, Casimira's world had twisted into a waking nightmare. The gentle employer who had welcomed her with smiles had transformed into something unrecognizable. Guadalupe's words cut like knives, her presence filling the mansion with a suffocating chill. And when Casimira faltered, when exhaustion made her stumble or hunger left her weak, she was reminded with icy precision: obedience is survival, defiance is death. The punishments had become a system, a ritual. At first they seemed like harsh lessons, but soon they revealed their true nature: experiments. Guadalupe was no longer simply punishing, she was testing. Each humiliation, each blow was measured. How long until the girl collapsed? How many hours could she endure without food before her body betrayed her? How much terror could be inflicted before her mind began to break? The mansion had a secret heart hidden beneath its polished stone floors. The basement, once storage, had been converted into something far more sinister, a chamber of control. Casimira was dragged down there one night, her eyes wide, her breath sharp with terror. The air was damp, heavy with mold and candle smoke. Shackles bolted into the walls gleamed faintly in the flickering light. A brazier smoldered in the corner, heating iron tools whose purpose was obvious even before they touched skin. Here, Guadalupe became what she truly was: not a widow, not a benefactor, but a predator in her element. She circled Casimira like a beast assessing prey, whispering words more intimate than screams. Look at yourself, thin, worthless, filthy, but I can change you. I can make you better. Her voice dripped with false tenderness, and that was the most terrifying part. It was not rage that drove her, but cold calculation. The torture was not random, it was precise. Iron pressed near the girl's skin, the heat searing her mind before it ever touched her flesh. Strikes delivered not to kill, but to bruise, to weaken, to remind her of power she would never possess. And between these moments of agony came care, salves applied carefully, wounds tended with the precision of a physician. Healing not out of mercy, but necessity. Casimira was not meant to die, yet she was meant to endure. To break slowly, Above them, Aurelio, Guadalupe's own son, tried to drown the sounds with laudanum, but the screams seeped into the walls, into his bones. He knew the pattern, he knew what came next, and still no one in the city suspected a thing. Because monsters don't hide in shadows, they hide in plain sight. By late February, Casimira was no longer the same girl who had knocked on Guadalupe's door with hope in her eyes. She had been reduced to a hollow shadow, trembling at every command, her voice breaking into stutters of apology even when no accusation was spoken. The punishments were no longer about work or mistakes. They had become ritualistic, designed only to strip away identity, piece by piece, until nothing remained but obedience. Aurelio, pale and shaking, wrote frantic entries in his journal upstairs. His handwriting grew jagged, manic, as he confessed to paper what he could not say aloud. The screaming never stops. She tells me it is for the girl's improvement. But her eyes glow when she speaks of pain. This is not correction. This is pleasure. The truth is, Guadalupe had crossed a line. What began as cruelty hidden beneath the cloak of discipline had evolved into an art of domination. She wasn't experimenting on Casimira anymore. She was consuming her. Every cry, every flinch, every tear became nourishment, feeding a hunger that words could not satisfy. And like all hunger, it demanded more. One night in early March, the ritual ended, not with a climax of violence, but with the quiet collapse of a body pushed beyond all endurance. Casimira's heart simply failed. One moment she writhed under Guadalupe's meticulous torment, and the next silence. The silence was so unnatural, so abrupt, that even Guadalupe paused. She pressed her fingers to the girl's throat. Nothing, her specimen, was gone. For a brief instant, she felt disappointment. Her experiment had ended too soon. But then came the surge of satisfaction, a dark rush that spread through her like fire. Casimira's death was not a failure. It was a revelation. The power she felt at that moment was unlike anything she had known, and she wanted it again. But power always brings the problem of concealment. Guadalupe wrapped the frail body in old sheets and, under the cover of night, carried it to a vacant lot at the city's edge. The soil was soft, easy to pierce, eager to swallow secrets. She dug the grave without hesitation, lowered the bundle, and pressed the earth back over it until the ground was smooth once more. Standing over that grave, her black veil shrouding her face, Guadalupe made a decision that would define her future. This was only the beginning. Casimira was not the end of her darkness. She was the gateway. And once a gateway opens, it never closes. After Casimira's burial, the mansion returned to silence. To the neighbors, nothing had changed. The widow Bejarano still attended Mass every Sunday, still donated generously to the cathedral, still hosted respectable gatherings in her candlelit drawing room. If anything, she seemed even more radiant, as though charity had renewed her spirit. No one saw that the glow in her eyes was not virtue, it was hunger. Guadalupe had tasted the ultimate power, the ability to unmake a life completely, to strip body and spirit down to nothing, and then decide the exact moment existence would end. But she had also learned, Casimira's death had come too soon. Next time she would be more careful. Next time she would pace herself, refine her methods, and prolong the suffering. What she sought was not just murder, it was mastery. So she entered what she called her professional phase. For nearly a year, Guadalupe poured herself into her public role. She expanded her domestic placement business, sending obedient young girls into the homes of Mexico's most powerful families. She chaired charity drives, organized church fundraisers, and cultivated friendships with the city's elite. Each gesture of generosity polished her mask until it gleamed. Her reputation became untouchable. Respectability was her greatest weapon, and she sharpened it with precision. But behind the facade, she studied. She researched methods of restraint, learned from physicians how wounds could heal just enough to keep a victim alive, experimented with herbs and salves to sustain bodies she intended to break again and again. She cataloged everything, the mistakes, the successes, the limits. She was no longer improvising, she was building a system. And all the while, her son Aurelio slipped further into madness. His journal pages became darker, more erratic, filled with desperate prayers and confessions that no one would ever hear. He tried to resist, tried to question, but Guadalupe had anticipated this weakness. She arranged for him to see a German physician who conveniently diagnosed him as unstable, his testimony unreliable. If Aurelio ever tried to expose her, no one would believe a word. By the autumn of 1888, Guadalupe was ready. She had rebuilt her mask, perfected her strategy, and waited patiently for the next opportunity. It came in the form of another desperate girl, led by her mother to the mansion gates, seeking work, seeking survival, and Guadalupe, smiling with the polished warmth of false benevolence, already knew this one would last longer. This one would give her the masterpiece she craved. Because evil, once fed, never sleeps, it evolves. Elena Santos was only 14 when she and her mother stood at the iron gates of the Bejarano mansion in the fall of 1888. Poverty had hollowed their faces, and desperation had carved fear into every word they spoke. Guadalupe, draped in mourning black, opened the gates with a saintly smile. She listened patiently as the mother pleaded, "Señora, my daughter is strong, obedient. She only wishes to serve." Guadalupe touched the woman's hand with calculated tenderness. "Of course, my dear. The Lord rewards those who care for his children. Leave her with me, and I will see she has food, shelter, and guidance." Her voice was honey, but her eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, were already devouring Elena. That night, Elena's mother left the mansion relieved, convinced she had saved her daughter from starvation. She had no idea she had delivered her into the arms of a predator who wore charity like a mask. For the first few days, Guadalupe played her role flawlessly. Elena was given warm food, a bed with clean sheets, and light chores around the house. The girl felt grateful, even blessed. "Obey me, and you will be safe," Guadalupe reminded her with gentle authority, echoing the same words she once whispered to Casimira. But the transition came quickly this time. Guadalupe no longer hesitated, no longer wasted months on subtlety. She had refined her technique: kindness first, cruelty second, control always. Soon, Elena's meals grew smaller, her tasks harsher, her mistakes exaggerated, until she lived in constant fear of failure. At night, Guadalupe would loom in her doorway, watching, whispering corrections in the dark, as if sculpting not a servant, but a possession. When the first punishment arrived, it was carefully staged. A single slap across the face, sharp enough to shock but not to bruise, followed by immediate mercy. A cloth pressed to the cheek, a soft coo. "You see, Nija, I correct you because I care." The mixture of pain and comfort confused Elena's young mind, making obedience feel like salvation. Soon, the girl was drawn into the same basement chamber Casimira had once known. But this time, Guadalupe's methods were smoother, almost clinical. She alternated between cruelty and care so flawlessly that Elena began to blur the two together, unable to tell where punishment ended and protection began. Every scream was followed by a whisper of comfort, every wound by the promise of healing. And Aurelio listened from above, his nerves fraying like old rope. His journal spoke of Elena's cries with haunting clarity. "The house breathes with her suffering. My mother calls it correction, I call it slaughter, and yet I do nothing. I am complicit. God forgive me." But forgiveness was no longer possible inside the Bejarano mansion. Elena's arrival had marked the beginning of a new chapter. Guadalupe wasn't experimenting anymore. She was perfecting, and with each calculated act of cruelty, the widow's hunger grew sharper, more insatiable. At first, Elena believed she could endure. She whispered prayers at night, clutching the small wooden rosary her mother had pressed into her palm before leaving. "This is only temporary," she told herself. "I will serve, I will please, and then one day I'll return home." But the mansion had its own gravity. Days bled into weeks, and soon, hope became harder to grasp. The chores stretched from sunrise to midnight. Meals dwindled to scraps. Every mistake, real or invented, was met with punishment that blurred the line between discipline and cruelty. A dropped dish meant hours of kneeling on raw stone floors. A misstep in her prayers meant the whip. Sometimes Guadalupe denied her water until her lips cracked in blood. Yet the cruelty was always paired with false mercy. After every punishment, Guadalupe would cradle Elena's face, applying salve to her wounds, pressing a cup of broth to her lips, murmuring, "I do this because I love you. I correct you as God corrects the sinner." The contradiction tore at Elena's mind, planting seeds of guilt and dependency. She began to believe she deserved it, that survival required submission. Aurelio recorded the descent with trembling hands. Her cries are weaker now. She no longer protests. When mother raises her hand, the girl bows her head as if in prayer. She is becoming hollow. and my silence makes me her executioner." Guadalupe had achieved what she once failed with Casimiro: endurance. She paced Elena's suffering with precision, giving just enough relief to prolong the agony. Weeks turned to months, and the girl's spirit crumbled piece by piece. The rosary beads slipped from her hand one night, scattered across the floor, and she did not pick them up. That was the moment hope finally left her eyes. By early 1889, Elena was no longer a child but a vessel, obedient, broken, stripped of self. That was when Guadalupe began her ritualized cruelty. She would dress Elena in a fresh white shift before each session, as if preparing her for a sacrament. The basement chamber became a theater, the punishments escalating in calculated waves, each followed by false tenderness, each designed not to kill but to stretch the torment across endless days. But even the most delicate cruelty has its limits. By spring, Elena's body could no longer endure. She collapsed one night during a punishment, her chest heaving, her pulse faint. Guadalupe tried to revive her, furious that her masterpiece was slipping away too soon. But as Elena's breath slowed, a strange calm settled over her features, as if death was not defeat but release. When the girl's final breath escaped, Guadalupe lingered over the body, stroking her hair with something resembling affection. Then, with practiced efficiency, she prepared the corpse for disposal. Another grave, another secret beneath the soil. But this time, the satisfaction was different. Casimiro had been Guadalupe's initiation. Elena was her perfection. And the feeling that surged through her as she buried the second girl was not just hunger, it was triumph. Guadalupe Bejarano was no longer hiding behind the mask of charity. She was becoming something far worse, a predator who believed her cruelty was sacred duty. By the summer of 1889, the city of Mexico had begun to murmur. Too many girls had vanished from poor barrios, too many mothers left weeping at church altars with no answers. Some whispered that the streets themselves had turned cursed, that shadows swallowed the innocent. Others suspected trafficking rings, criminal gangs, or worse, yet no one dared point a finger toward the Grand Bejarano mansion where Sadora Guadalupe moved like a saint among the people. She was untouchable, her name engraved on donation ledgers, her face a fixture in every church pew. To accuse her would be unthinkable, like accusing the Virgin's own handmaiden. Still, suspicion has a way of seeping through cracks. Once, a priest remarked quietly that it was strange. How many young girls entered Guadalupe's service, yet how few ever returned. Another neighbor noted the heavy earth smell that lingered near the gardens after midnight. A washerwoman swore she had seen a pale hand protruding from a shallow mound before it was hastily covered. Each rumor was quickly silenced, brushed aside by Guadalupe's allies. Nonsense, they said. She is a woman of God. But Aurelio knew better. His journals became more frantic, his handwriting jagged. The city whispers, but no one sees. They worship her mask, not her deeds, and I hear the cries under my floorboards. I am damned by my silence. Guadalupe herself sensed the whispers, but rather than retreat, she leaned into her role with terrifying brilliance. She expanded her charity work, organizing public food drives, offering shelter to orphans, and increasing her visibility in the cathedral. She even took in a priest as a guest for several weeks, ensuring that her home was seen as sanctified ground. Every suspicion that flickered was smothered by her dazzling display of holiness. Yet behind the polished exterior, her hunger only sharpened. Elena's death had not quenched her thirst, it had inflamed it. The satisfaction of control, of perfecting cruelty, left her restless. She began to crave not only the suffering of her victims, but also the thrill of deceiving an entire city, of dancing untouched in plain sight. For Guadalupe Bejarano, each act of charity was not a mask, it was a weapon. The more she was revered, the freer she was to kill. And as the whispers faded into the city's noise, the widow prepared for her next victim. This time, she would choose with even greater care. This time, she would ensure not only the breaking of a body, but the total annihilation of a soul. Her next prey was not chosen from the gutters of Mexico City, but from a family of modest respectability, a seamstress's daughter named Isabella Marin. 17 years old, with bright eyes and a spirit that refused to bow, Isabella was nothing like the hollow, starving girls Guadalupe usually lured. She was educated, quick-witted, and stubbornly proud. Guadalupe spotted her in the cathedral one Sunday morning. The girl sang louder than the choir, her voice rising above the congregation like a flame refusing to be smothered. Guadalupe watched from her pew, lips curling in the faintest smile. A strong one, she thought, a challenge. The opportunity came days later. Guadalupe approached Isabella's mother with her perfected script of charity. "Your daughter deserves a future, Señora. In my household, she will learn refinement, discipline. She will be safe." The mother hesitated. The Mariens were not beggars, and her daughter was not in desperate need. But Guadalupe's reputation was untouchable, and her offer was cloaked in honor. Reluctantly, she agreed. From the moment Isabella stepped into the mansion, the atmosphere shifted. She was not naive like Casimira, nor frail like Alina. She questioned orders, resisted commands, and when Guadalupe struck her the first time, she did not cry. She glared. Aurelio wrote of her with awe, "This one is different. She does not break. Mother's hand falls heavier, but the girl still stands. Her spirit is iron. God, I pray she escapes before it is too late." But Guadalupe relished the resistance. To her, Isabella's defiance was not an obstacle but a prize. The harder the spirit, the greater the triumph in breaking it. She escalated her methods. Days without food, nights chained in the cellar, punishments that left welts across the girl's back. Yet every scream was answered with the same whispered refrain. "This is love, Nina. This is correction." For weeks, Isabella endured, her fire dimming but never extinguishing. But what Guadalupe failed to anticipate was the Marin family's persistence. Unlike the poor mothers who vanished into silence, Isabella's parents asked questions. They visited the mansion more than once, demanding to see their daughter. Each time, Guadalupe deflected with lies. "She is resting. She is unwell. She is too busy with her studies." Whispers began to rise again, sharper this time. A girl of good standing had vanished into the Bejarano household, and no one had seen her since. The priest who once defended Guadalupe now shifted uneasily in her presence. Neighbors noted that the mansion's garden soil was always freshly turned. Inside the walls, Guadalupe fought a war of patience. She had grown addicted to the thrill of cruelty, but now her appetite threatened to betray her. To keep her mask intact, she would have to decide to release Isabella alive and risk her secrets spilling, or silence her forever and gamble with the mounting suspicions. Guadalupe's choice would decide whether the Bejarano mansion remained a sanctuary of Díaz or the stage for her downfall. By autumn of 1889, the Marin family's unease had hardened into desperation. Isabella had been gone for weeks, and every visit to the Bejarano mansion ended with excuses too thin to silence suspicion. "She is ill," Guadalupe would insist, offering trays of bread or coins to distract the worried mother. "You must trust me, Señora. I only want what is best for her." But the mother's instincts clawed through every lie. She returned again and again, sometimes banging on the gates, demanding to see her daughter. Neighbors whispered about the scenes, about the proud widow who suddenly seemed rattled behind her veil of composure. Inside the mansion, the tension was suffocating. Aurelio's journal entries became frantic, written as though his quill might break through the page. "The girl does not yield. She looks my mother in the eye, even when blood stains her mouth. She whispers prayers not to be spared, but to remain unbroken. I hear them in the night. I fear my mother more than ever, for I see in her eyes a need not just to punish, but to erase." Guadalupe paced the halls like a predator cornered. The Mariens were pressing too hard, the whispers too loud. Her perfect mask of sainthood was cracking. She could not risk releasing Isabella. Too much had been seen, too much endured. The girl's body bore the truth in scars, and so Guadalupe made her decision. One storm-lashed night, she descended into the cellar with the ritual calm of a priestess approaching an altar. Isabella lay chained, gaunt but defiant, her eyes still lit with that stubborn flame. Guadalupe cupped the girl's face as though in benediction. "You could have been my most perfect creation," she whispered, "but fire cannot be tamed. It must be smothered." The act was deliberate, ceremonial. No frenzy, no haste. Just silence, a hand over the mouth, pressure applied until defiance gave way to stillness. When it was done, Guadalupe closed her eyes, inhaling the hush that followed, as though drawing strength from the extinguishing of that final spark. But unlike her previous victims, Isabella's absence could not be buried so easily. The Mariens raised alarm beyond the neighborhood, reaching priests, merchants, even city officials. Rumors swelled into accusations. Some dared to speak the unthinkable. The widow Bejarano hides something in her house. Guadalupe, ever the tactician, struck back with brilliance. She hosted a public feast at the cathedral, feeding dozens of orphans in full view of the clergy. She gave alms so generously that the archbishop himself praised her in a sermon. A woman of unmatched virtue, he declared. And just like that, the tide of suspicion ebbed once more. Yet Aurelio's journal told another story. The city bows before her mask, but the house reeks of death. I walk past the garden and see the earth move, as if it breathes with her sins. How long before the soil spits her secrets back into the world? For now, Guadalupe stood unchallenged, her name cleansed by charity. But beneath the polished marble of the cathedral floors and the fragrant incense of Mass, a darker truth festered. And the city of Mexico was not finished with her yet. The Marians did not relent. After weeks of unanswered questions, they carried their pleas beyond the neighborhood, into the echoing halls of the municipal court. Their cries reached sympathetic ears among minor officials, men who were less swayed by sermons than by whispers of scandal. And so, for the first time, Guadalupe's fortress was breached. Not by force, but by authority. A city inspector arrived at the mansion one crisp November morning. His knock echoed like thunder through the marble corridors. Guadalupe, draped in black silk, received him with her usual smile of sorrowful charity. "Señora Bejarano," he began, bowing slightly. "There are concerns about a young woman, Isabella Martin. It is said she was last seen in your company. I am here only to ensure her safety." Guadalupe's eyes glistened with a perfectly rehearsed grief. She pressed a lace handkerchief to her lips. "Ah, poor Isabella. How cruel that gossip mocks a child's suffering. The truth is, she grew ill under my roof. I sent her away to a convent in Puebla for rest. The sisters care for her now." "Would you accuse me, sir, of withholding aid from a dying girl?" the inspector faltered. To challenge a widow of such standing, whose name dripped from the archbishop's tongue like incense, was no small risk. Still, he asked to see the house. And so, for the first time, Guadalupe led an outsider through her chambers. She guided him past immaculate silence, gleaming crucifixes, and children in neatly pressed clothes who recited catechisms with trembling precision. The inspector saw no chains, no blood, only the pristine illusion of holiness. But Aurelio, watching from the staircase, wrote of what the inspector did not see. If he had gone to the cellar, he would have found the stains that no lime can erase. If he had stepped into the garden, he might have felt the earth shift beneath his boots. But Mother moved like a conductor, directing his gaze, veiling every horror with beauty. He left with apologies instead of questions. The report filed the next day cleared Guadalupe of suspicion, a woman of unimpeachable charity. It read, no evidence of misconduct. Yet something had changed. The mask had been tested, and though it held, a crack had formed. The inspector's visit spread through the city like a rumor with wings. People began to murmur in taverns and marketplaces. Why had the Marin girl not written from Puebla? Why did Guadalupe's garden flourish so unnaturally green, even in drought? The mansion stood untouched, but its shadow grew darker with every whispered question. Guadalupe knew it. She felt it in her bones. The city was watching her more closely now, and the next knock on her door might not be so easily silenced. By early 1890, the mansion on Tuba Street had become a cage of whispers. Servants moved through the corridors with lowered eyes, their footsteps muffled, their breaths shallow. Every creak of the floorboards seemed to carry the weight of secrets buried too close to the surface. But in a house where silence was law, one voice began to tremble against the chains. Her name was Marta, a thin, sharp-eyed maid barely 15 years old. She had been brought from Hidalgo by her desperate parents, promised wages and protection under the widow Bejarano's patronage. Instead, she found herself cleaning blood she did not spill, carrying trays into rooms where screams were swallowed by stone. Marta had seen too much, and unlike the others, she was not willing to carry it silently. It began in whispers to the neighbors, a slip of the tongue at the market, a trembling confession to a priest. "Something is wrong in that house," she murmured. "Girls go in, but they don't come out." Aurelio noticed first. In his journal, the entry shook with uneasy. "One of the servants speaks too much. I see the fear in her eyes, but also her defiance. She will not last. Mother watches her like a hawk circling its prey. I pray she flees before it is too late." though I know mother's reach extends even into the streets. Guadalupe, of course, knew nothing within those walls escaped her notice. She summoned Marta one night into the parlor, the firelight painting long shadows across the floor. Draped in her widow's veil, Guadalupe spoke with the calmness of a confessor. "My child, I hear you are troubled. You must understand, this house demands loyalty. Do you believe loyalty to me is a sin?" Marta's lips quivered. She shook her head, but her silence betrayed her, and Guadalupe smiled, that chilling, gentle smile that masked her cruelty. For now, she let Marta live, but not out of mercy. She knew the girl's whispers were already spreading like smoke through the neighborhood. To silence her too quickly would confirm every suspicion. Instead, Guadalupe chose patience. She would watch, she would wait, and when the moment came, she would strike in a way that left no trace. Outside, the city was stirring. Priests muttered of disappearances in confessionals, and mothers warned their daughters not to walk past the Bejarano mansion after dusk. The once revered widow was still untouchable in public, still praised from pulpits, but in kitchens, markets, and taverns, a darker name began to cling to her: La Bruja de Tuba Street, and within her own walls, Aurelio felt the noose tightening. "The house no longer obeys her in silence," he wrote. "It breathes like a wounded beast. The servants look at me not with fear, but with questions. And Mother smiles too calmly, as though she already holds the knife." The mask was slipping. The empire of shadows she had built with such precision was beginning to collapse, not from the outside, but from within. And Guadalupe Martinez de Bejarano knew. Her greatest threat was no longer the city. It was her own house. It happened on a night swollen with rain. Thunder rolled across Mexico City, rattling shutters and flooding alleys. Inside the mansion, the air was heavier than the storm outside, thick with fear, thick with secrets. Marta had reached her breaking point. She had watched too many girls vanish. She had scrubbed too many stains from stone floors that reeked of iron and decay. And when Guadalupe left the parlor that night to kneel before her gilded crucifix, Marta slipped into Aurelio's chamber. Her hands trembled as she clutched a rosary. Her voice was barely more than a whisper. "Aurelio, you know what she does. You write it down. I've seen you. If we tell the police together, if we go now, we can end this." Aurelio stared at her, pale and torn. His ink-stained fingers hovered over his journal, the pages swollen with years of secrets. He wanted to run, to take Marta's hand and flee into the storm. But the chains that bound him were not made of iron. They were stitched into his soul. His mother's gaze haunted every corner of his mind. "Do not mistake me for your salvation," he whispered hoarsely. "If she suspects me, I am already dead, and so are you." They did not know that Guadalupe was already listening. She had returned silently, her footsteps swallowed by the storm. From the doorway she watched the flicker of lightning illuminating her black veil and cold, unwavering eyes. "Marta," she said softly, almost tenderly. The girl froze. "You wound me, child. To plot betrayal under my roof after all I have given you." Marta dropped to her knees, sobbing, begging forgiveness. But Guadalupe did not raise her voice. She only smiled, that measured, serpent smile, and laid a hand on the girl's head as if in blessing. "You need not fear, little dove," she murmured. "Confession cleanses all." That night, Marta vanished. Some said she was sent away to a convent. Others whispered she had fled the city. But those who lived inside the mansion knew the truth. They felt it in the silence that followed, in the way Guadalupe's garden grew thicker, richer, as though it fed on more than rain. Aurelio wrote with a shaking hand, "I should have saved her. She begged me, and I faltered. Now the house is quieter than ever, and Mother prays with greater fervor. But I know her prayers are not to God, they are to her own power. The power of fear." The rebellion had sparked, and Guadalupe crushed it with terrifying swiftness. But she could not unmake the storm it left behind. For the first time, her servants no longer feared her in silence, they feared her in whispers. By spring of 1890, the storm Marta had ignited was no longer trapped within the mansion. It seeped into the cobblestones of Tuba Street, into the air of the bustling markets, into the pews of the churches where the faithful gathered. At first, it was only whispers, timid, breathless. They say girls vanish there. They say the widow feeds the earth with their bones. They say her wealth is bought with blood. But whispers in Mexico City were like sparks in dry grass. It took only one priest, Father Ignacio, a stern man with a trembling conscience, to lend them voice from the pulpit. "Beware false saints," he thundered one Sunday, his words cloaked as parable but sharp as accusation. "For there are wolves who wear veils of mourning and piety, and they do not pray to God, they pray to death itself." The congregation gasped. Many turned their eyes toward Tuba Street. Some crossed themselves in fear. A few, bolder than the rest, began to murmur Marta's name, the maid who had vanished after seeking confession. Guadalupe did not attend Mass that day, but she heard of it before noon. Seated in her parlor, rosary beads slipping calmly through her fingers, she listened as Aurelio read her the sermon. Her face did not change, her lips did not tremble. Only when the last word left his mouth did she speak, her voice cool as steel. "Priests may damn with words, but I command with silence. Remember that, Aurelio. Words fade, silence endures." Yet silence was no longer hers to command. Women in the marketplace now hurried their daughters past the Bejarano mansion, crossing themselves as though warding off a curse. Men in taverns spoke of graves beneath her garden, of cries carried by the night wind. And in government halls, where power had always protected her, a seed of unease began to grow. If enough voices rose against her, even the wealthiest widow could not stand forever. Aurelio's journal bled with dread. The city whispers her name with fear, and still she smiles. I know that smile. Mother does not fear accusation. She fears only betrayal, which means her wrath will soon fall, not upon the city, but upon this house. God help whoever she suspects next. Guadalupe Martinez de Bejarano had survived many storms, but this one was different. This storm had been born inside her walls, nurtured by her cruelty, and now it howled against her from every corner of the city. For the first time, the widow of Tuba Street was no longer untouchable. She was hunted.